what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
Alrighty, welcome to another episode of I Guess I'll Do It with Pat House, where I talk to comedians about comedy and other shit like that. Today is a guest I'm very excited to have. She's from Cleveland, and her debut album, Hillbilly Bougie, just came out. So today I have Mary Santora. Mary, what's up?
Hey, how are ya? Thanks for having me.
Doing well. Yo, absolutely. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. I've got a cold right now, which is not ideal. What are you gonna do, you know?
Yep, it is that time of year, and it's COVID year as well.
Dude,
so, I mean,
when I tell you that I had the worst panic attack of my life the other day, Wednesday, I got tested for COVID, and then obviously you don't get your result. I didn't get like the rapid test that my doctor ordered one, so it takes like 24 to 48 hours, and my dad just passed away from COVID. So I'm like freaking out. I'm like, I'm going to be just like him. This is the worst. When I tell you, like, I've had issues with anxiety for years, and I was so at a breaking point that I called a national mental health crisis hotline. And I was like, because I didn't know who else to call. I called my boyfriend. He was at work. My sister didn't answer the phone. So I call this like 24/7 mental health crisis hotline, and it was fucking busy. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, this is not what is supposed to, this is like, you have one purpose, and it is to answer the phone.
This is not the time to be understaffed.
Right. It was wild. I couldn't believe it. COVID test came back negative. So it is just a cold, which makes me feel even more ridiculous. But yeah, it's been.
Well,
it's
no,
so
I mean, you know what? You had every reason to have that panic attack there. You know, that wasn't unwarranted.
Right. I know. It was just like, you know.
Yeah, no, you have a moment and your brain gets a little extra carried away, and that's neither good nor, like, it happens. Like, right. We've all had our brains go to that far corner of the universe where you're like, what the fuck am I doing, or what did I just do? Right. And times like now make it even crazier.
Exactly, yeah.
So the album just came out?
Yeah, super excited. It did really, really well in pre-sale, which is awesome. It's called Hillbilly Bougie. I recorded it at Hilarities in Cleveland. It's my first album. I've never put anything out. I've been doing stand-up for 9 years, which it felt like, you know, getting to the point where I have some material that I really, really like that maybe I'm not super connected with anymore, but I want to get it out there, you know? So it's been exciting.
Very cool. I did my first album at 9 years as well, and I think that's a good time because that puts basically your first decade out there.
Right. I think
and then I feel
like to kind of like get a hold of what you're doing, have like at least some kind of an understanding of how stand-up works, you know?
Yeah, you have an hour of material under your belt. You've been working on it for years and years and years, and then I found the second album came so much easier. So much easier.
You know what? I think so too. Like, it's so funny because when I was putting together my set list for this album, I was like, okay, this is kind of the theme or the things I want on there. And then I was like, oh, damn, I still have like 25 minutes of stuff that I'm currently doing that doesn't, you know what I mean? So it's like, oh, so it's at the point where you're like, oh, okay, so the second one is not going to take 9 more years. It might take another year or two just to get it where it needs to be, you know?
Yeah, I feel like the writing comes easier and you just know more and you get better as a comic. So everything just blends together nicely, you know, and you're already excited. And another album is like a goal. So it's something to work towards. Like I did my first album at year 9, the second at year 13 or 14, and I have the third one in the can, and I did that in less than 2.5 years. And It's my favorite material so far because I kept writing, and the writing got better, and like I used to have all these short jokes, and now they're longer chunks. So
yeah,
it gets easier, but it kind of does.
Yeah, well, I think it's not as scary, I think. You know, like releasing this first album was kind of like, not nerve-wracking, but it's also like, you know, I've never when you do a live show, it's like the people are either going to like you or they're not, and most likely they're not going to remember you. You know, like you might leave with one or
Oh
two
God,
new
yeah.
followers from Instagram, but they're going to be like, "Oh, we saw that girl one time and she was good." You know what I mean? Or that girl sucked last weekend. Like that's usually what it is. But when you put it out there,
Yeah.
it's like your name's attached to it forever for as long as it's on the internet. So it's just a little you know, it's like I've made the analogy before where I feel like I'm sending my first kid off to school. Like I'm waiting at the bus stop and I'm like, all right, don't start fights with other people. I want you to get along. I want it to be well received. Like, you know, I want it to do well.
It's a great analogy. Yeah. You're putting something out there and you don't know how it's going to be received, but it'll be good. I guarantee you that.
You're proud of it.
But it's funny that you say that. I'm going to backtrack 1 second because you just said something. You said that, like, you know, you leave with 1 or 2 followers. I can't even count the amount of times where I've had friends or family members tell me they saw a comedy show and they do not remember any names. It is fucking incredible that if you see a band, you know who you saw. Right. But when you go to a comedy club, you see 4 or 5 comedians, people are like, I have no idea who I saw. Like, you didn't write the names, like nothing. And that's always been the case. As long as I've been doing this, nobody remembers comedians.
I'm not as surprised that they don't remember everybody. I'm really surprised when they don't remember someone that they loved. When they go and they're like, oh my God, I saw this comedian. He was the funniest comedian I've ever seen. I've never laughed that hard. I'm like, oh my God, what was he named? Like, you know what? I don't know. I'm like, what? Like, how did you have that much fun and not care?
How is that possible?
Right.
Dude, but this happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So you recorded the album at Hilarities. I love that club. I've been there several times. That club is fantastic, and the staff there and management and owners are awesome.
Yeah, it's wonderful. That place is like a second home to me, man. I've been there for about probably 6 years now. I think I got my first hosting weekend when I was like 3 years in, and I was doing these little they had an 11 p.m. Saturday night showcase called the Primetime Showcase. Ironically named because 11 p.m. on a Saturday night is not prime time for comedy at all.
No.
So I started doing those when I was maybe a year and a half into comedy, and then it took me about another year and a half to get up to the main stage. But yeah, I've been so lucky to have that as like my home club, to, you know, have that be the stage that I learned how to grow on. It's wild.
Oh, it's a great room. And I mean, I've had some really fun shows there. And I'm going to throw in there that you and I have actually never even met, but we like know each other kind of somewhat well because of Dan Cummins. I opened for him a lot, and I know you do as well.
Right. That's how it was. I think we were on like an email chain together or something. And then it was like, hey, save the other openers' phone numbers in case you need to trade weekends. And then we just like started texting about comedy.
Absolutely. So I met Dan at Hilarities. It was a random booking. He wasn't as popular as he was now. I don't even know. This may have even been right before Time Sucks started. So anyway, just a random booking. He's the headliner. I'm the feature. We hit it off, and I'm performing in Spokane and Tacoma. And Lindsay is like, just stay with us. Like, I met them one time, and we hit it off, and they invited me to stay in their home with them. And we have been like so close ever since.
They're the sweetest
They're
people
awesome
ever.
people.
They're so good. Lindsay's
they
from
totally are.
Cleveland. Lindsay's from Parma, which is a suburb of Cleveland. And so I actually worked with Dan for the first time at Hilarities too. And Lindsay was there, obviously. And it was like Dan was an afterthought because Lindsay and I were hitting it off so much and like talking about different people that we knew and like places that we went growing up and all that. Like her and I bonded over Cleveland just so quickly, which was pretty cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, they're such good people, and I have a ton of fun on the road with Dan because his crowds are pretty awesome.
They're amazing. That was the first
Not
time.
To say
Go ahead. Sorry.
No. I was going to bring up a specific show, but I mean, we had one crazy night in Albany with a really rough crowd that Dan and I still talk about to this day. But other than that, the shows are pretty much awesome.
Yeah, dude. His I guess he was the first person I worked with who had like such a sincere following of people who truly, truly like loved him and have since day one. You know what I mean? Like, cause he was on like Pandora and I feel like he benefited a lot from the Pandora age of comedy. And watching Dan, I love how we're just sucking Dan's dick for this whole podcast. He's gonna listen to this. Like, Jesus Christ.
To you. Well, it's because I always start off the podcast by like talking about how I met my guest, but we never met. So this is the only angle I had. So
Right. Well, it was just funny to me because I feel like one thing that I definitely learned from working with him is just like, because he came up through all the clubs and stuff too. He wasn't like a huge theater act. He had put in his time on the road. And the thing I respected is that he would stand after the shows and shake every single person's hand. He'll listen to their story. He'll, you know what I mean, take the pictures. And I was like, man, that's how you make like lifelong fans, is you pay attention and you care. Because some people just like,
yeah,
listen, if you're not buying the merch, keep moving, you know?
yep. You have to make eye contact, shake the hand, and establish a moment. Like let everybody have their moment. I had Chad Daniels on the podcast a couple months ago, and he said something really cool about when hardcore fans meet him, they'll apologize for having like a freak out fanboy giddy moment. He's like, no, have that moment. Like you're allowed to do this.
Right.
And some comics don't do that for people. But
Right.
Dan, like the mayor of the comedy club, greets everybody. And even I was with Dan in Nashville the night the stay-at-home orders started, like the night before.
Yeah.
He still did his meet and greet, but from 6 feet away. He would like
Yeah.
stand, like if somebody wanted a picture, they could take a selfie from 8 feet ahead of him. So he
Nice.
still did that. He made the change right away.
That's great. So great.
Yeah. All right. So you're 9 or 10 years in right now, correct?
It'll be 9 years in 11 days, February 23rd.
Oh, okay. I like that. You're one of the people that knows the exact day.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I had my first time on stage was at a student stand-up comedy competition at my college. So it was put on by the school. It was like a school sanctioned event. And so it wasn't like, I don't have that horror story first time on stage that a lot of people have where they're like, I was in a bar with 4 drunk people and nobody knew comedy was happening. It was like, no, there was like a couple hundred students in our auditorium. And there was 10 students who wanted to be comics that performed and competed. And it was awesome. It was honestly amazing. And I go back and watch.
Wow, that's an unusual first time.
Yeah, it was really cool though, and I like because I mean, imagine your first time performing, being in front of your audience. You know what I mean? I was 21 years old. I was in front of. Well, I was 22. I was in front of other 22-year-olds. Like it was a college student doing college material in front of college students. Like it was a failsafe. You know what I mean? So
yeah, absolutely.
It was a really good time, and one of the judges was one of the bookers or managers at the Toledo Funny Bone, because I went to school at the University of Toledo in Ohio, and there's a club there not too far away. And one of the managers was the judge of the competition, and he was like, hey, we also do a competition if you want to do that. So like I basically went from competition to competition, placed well in both of them, and then I didn't start bombing, like really bombing, until I was like 6 months in. Because I was just involved in these like competitions, and then I took like a class. So like I never experienced that real like horrible. Why am I doing
That's
this?
soul crushing. What the fuck is this?
Yes, it took me a while to get there, you know. But my first couple times on stage were honestly pretty awesome.
You're the first person on the podcast that has that kind of experience. That's really awesome. I didn't get my ass handed to me until 2 weeks in. I did 2 open mics, both on a Wednesday. They were both great. My third time back, I ate shit, and then I did for the next 3 months, and then I started to figure some stuff out.
It's kind of like when it rains, it pours type of deal, because you're like, I was doing well at like every opportunity I was given. And then I moved back to Cleveland from Toledo, and then I started bombing so fucking hard. It was so bad. Like every mic, every set I did for a couple months, and it was because it was the first time I was really doing sets in bars where nobody knew me, and I didn't have fans in the audience.
You didn't have a safety net.
Friends. Yeah. I like worked at bars in Toledo, and I would have my regulars come out, and like I was the person. I honestly, looking back, I was the person that anybody would hate. Where I would show up at a mic with 10 or 15 people there to watch me. You know what I mean? So I would do really well, and then me and all 10 of my friends would go get drunk at the bar afterward. You know?
Yeah, I always hated not the person that brought 10 people, but the person that would bring 10 people, and then as soon as they were done, everybody leaves.
Yes. Well, that was me, is what I'm saying. So I didn't realize what I was doing to everybody else. I was just like, man, I'm pretty good at this comedy thing, you know?
Yeah, I'm really good when my hardcore friends follow me to every open mic.
Right. When the guys who are regulars at the bar and want to sleep with me, when they show up, it's pretty cool, you know?
So, so with that very first set, you said it went well. How much material did you have prepared? If it's your first time doing stand-up, there's hundreds of people in the crowd. Like, what was your preparation for that like?
So I was a big fan of Dane Cook. I think as most girls my age were. But I wrote everything out. I wrote everything out word for word for probably the first year that I did stand up. I wrote out every single joke word for word. And then I would go back and change the words that didn't work. So I have like notebooks and notebooks and notebooks full of old jokes because they're written out paragraph style. So I would do it almost like memorizing a speech, where I would write it out like that, and then I would go through and I would memorize it essentially like a speech or like a script. And so that's what I did for like 2 weeks leading up to the actual performance. It was called Last Rocket Standing because we were the Toledo Rockets.
Oh, okay. Clever name.
I know.
Do you have that recorded? Did you record that at all?
I do. I have it on my YouTube page, but it is private.
Okay.
I have it so only I can see it.
Did it sound like you were scripted? Like looking back now, did you sound like a robot? Was it like you were reading off a document? Because we've all seen those comics where it sounds like they're reading from a document. It's like, man, you must have said this out loud 600 times while the piece of paper was still in your hand. You can tell those people. Yeah,
and some people, that's just how they are. I don't think it sounds scripted. I was just so nervous that I was going so quickly, that I was talking so fast it was hard to understand, which was a problem the first probably 2 years I was in. And even further into that, I've always had an issue with speaking too quickly. And so that was more my takeaway from that than anything else, where I was like, dude, take a friggin' breath. Like, slow down. What are you doing, you know?
I feel like every single comic has talked about how they rushed through their first set because it's so unnatural to be up on stage in front of people, let alone for the first time talking. And it's just totally normal for us to rush through it. I was talking to my buddy Joe DeVito, and he was saying he thought for a second that he paused in his set, and then he went back and listened, and he didn't pause at all. He's like, I thought I stopped for 3 or 4 seconds, not even for half a second. He just went right through. So it's a weird time phenomena. Like, you don't know. It's
funny, too, because going through the recordings of this album, my first album, I've almost gone the complete 180. Whereas now, it's not that like I talk super slow or anything. It's a very conversational tone, just like it would be what we're having right now. But my pauses between jokes are much longer, where like I let that laughter stop. Like it goes from, so I think just because I had such a bad habit of speaking so quickly and stepping on my laughs for so long, that now I let all of the laughter and claps completely stop before I go on to my next bit.
Oh, absolutely. You have to let them laugh. And then as the laugh is winding down, it's a reset for you. You have the chance to stop, take a breath for a second. Like, all right, even though you know where you're going next, it's like, all right, what's next? And so that's why but we're all guilty of stepping over our own laughter too. It's natural because you rush through it. You don't know what you're doing. And then like, I love when comics are brand new and talking fast and the crowd is laughing. And it's like the comic micer doesn't even realize, like, no, stop here. Stop here. Right. Let them do what they're supposed to do. And then you can continue.
Right. That's exactly what it is. And I don't know if it was just being so conscious of it that I've gone the other way, or just being 9 years in that I'm not afraid of silence anymore. Like I've bombed so hard so many times that I'm like, I don't care if it's quiet. Like you're not going to scare me by being quiet.
Dude, it doesn't scare me at all. And then I tell crowds that too, man. If it's not going well, or if they're just more quiet, and I like pause and take a sip of water, I like scan the room and I'll be like, I'm not like, this doesn't bother me. Just so you know, I'm not fazed by this.
Right.
And then sometimes I'll tell the crowd like, sometimes I don't get combative, but like I can get snippy with them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'll be like, just so you know, it's not me.
Right.
Just letting you know it's not me.
Yeah. But also owning it when it is. Just be like, man,
Oh,
you guys really don't like me. Like this is
yeah.
on me.
But I love bombing stories though, because bombing is so useful. Like, you learn more from a bad set than you do a good one. If you have a good one, you're like, hey, shit was good.
I'm
Cool,
amazing.
let's go party. But if you bomb, you're like, all right, what went wrong? Was it me? Was I not on? There's a million things why. So the bombing makes you, think about what you did and why it happened.
Yeah.
There's so much more to learn.
Learning how to be okay with the bomb took me so goddamn long, dude. I mean, like within the last few years. I would honestly say 2018 is when I started to get really busy on the road. 2017, I was like traveling for free and going to like showcases in other cities and stuff. And then 2018 is when I
Yep.
started to get more club work and was actually not making money, but like doing paid gigs and things. So it took me probably until like end of 2019 into 2000 or end of 2018 into even 2019. So we're talking 7 years into comedy before I was like, okay, it's okay to not do well. Like you have to learn from these things and stop beating yourself up and stop crying about it, and now when I bomb, I still let myself feel it because it doesn't feel good. Anybody who, I don't believe anybody who says like, oh, if I bomb, it doesn't bother me. It still bothers me. You still want to do well.
Of course it does.
Right. But it's not
You just
like
learn
that,
to care less.
it's not that debilitating, oh my God, I can't believe I just bombed. It's all right, we're going to be upset for a little bit, but now that we're not upset anymore, what the hell went wrong? Was it you? Was it the crowd? Did you not sleep? Like what's going on? What are the factors here that contributed to why that didn't go well,
Of course, it takes a long time to get to that point too, because
Yeah.
you have to take a lot of beatings. But it's so much easier now to just say, fuck those people, and then be
Right.
over it. Whereas, like, when you bomb earlier in your career, if you're not doing an open mic for the next week, you're sitting with that bomb for a week, and that sucks.
Yes. Well, that's what's
You
been
want to
hard.
redeem yourself as soon as you can.
I think that's what's been hard with COVID for a lot of people is that even if you are getting live performances, they're so few and far between and you're so rusty that it's like, yeah, of course I'm not going to be as sharp as I was a year ago. You know what I mean? Like this is, yeah, I've done 5 shows in 6 months, like, so I think it's kind of just changing the way you look at it.
Yeah, things are so much better when you're in the groove.
Oh my God.
I mean, if you have nothing's better than when you have a couple weekends booked in a row and you're just hammering out this new set that you're working on. And by like the 3rd or 4th week, you're just a fucking machine.
Mm-hmm.
Like the jokes are there, your timing's on, you're adding tags. But even if so I hosted for Greg Giraldo he died in 2009. So 12, 13 years ago. And we're sitting in the green room one time and he goes, I'm rusty. I haven't done stand up in forever. And I asked him, how long's forever? And he said, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks.
Right.
That's forever in the comics world. I always think of that.
In January of 2020, a comic friend of mine was like, they bet me money. They're like, I bet you can't take 10 days off stand up. And I was like, why would I do that? Because I was really burnt out. I had been heavy traveling with Dan, but I was also on the weekends I'd book with him. I would drive and I would book in between dates on my own. So we would go somewhere Thursday, Friday, Saturday, sometimes Sunday. And then I would have like Monday to drive. And then I would book Tuesday, Wednesday somewhere before the next weekend at a club. So I was gone.
Oh, God, yeah.
Basically like 5 straight months that I was on the road. And a buddy of mine was like, I will give you $100 if you can take 10 days off stand up. And I remember by like the first 2 days were okay. And then by like the 3rd day, I was like, I don't even remember how to tell jokes anymore. Like it felt so foreign not to be on stage every single night. And then when the shutdown happened, it was like, oh, I'm never going to be a comedian again. Like this is just.
We all had that thought. So when the pandemic and stay-at-home orders began, did you write a lot?
Well, I didn't realize how much of an on-stage writer I am because I started.
Okay.
I started writing out every single word, and that's what I did for at least a year or 2. I would say definitely the first year, probably into the second year. And it wasn't until I was like that well-oiled machine, 2018-ish, I wasn't even a well-oiled machine then, but I'm saying like it wasn't until I was comfortable kind of not doing well and a little more in my groove where I felt comfortable taking premises on stage and just kind of working them out. And then I realized that I was on stage so much I had that privilege. I had that kind of comfortability where I could take a new idea. If I had a 25-minute feature weekend, I could take a new 5 minutes and just put it in the middle and see how it went. And I didn't realize how heavily I was relying on that, excuse me, until there was no stage, because I would sit down to write and I'm like, I have no idea. Like nothing's coming to me. And then my first weekend back on stage, I wrote like 7 new minutes on stage. I was like, God damn, this is what I've been missing.
Oh, that's awesome. See, I like hearing that. And I love hearing, I mean, every comic has their own approach to everything. I am certainly not an on-stage writer at all. So like, I'm not baffled by that. I have a ton of friends that do it, but I'm very impressed by that because I'm not scripted. Like I'm loose with my set, but I'm like 100% aware or cognizant of what I'm going to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I don't even have to have a set list, but I know what bullet points I'm hitting. But I don't know, even now, I'm coming up on 17 years. I don't know if I could go on stage. I don't know if that would work for me. I'm trying to think about it right now. Like, I'm doing a show tomorrow. Should I try it? I probably won't. But
it's very uncomfortable to get used to. Like, well, I kind of work backwards in that sense. And I haven't explained this to a lot of people. But when I am, excuse me, when I do write, quote unquote, on stage, I usually know obviously, the loose points of the story. And I always know the punchline. 99% of the time, I know the punchline. I know what I'm going to say last. So I more or less go on stage and have fun getting to that punchline. So I kind of work backwards where I'm like, all right, I know the funny line. I already know the funny part of this. Let's make the lead up funny and let's get to that point. So it's kind of like I start at the end and work backwards. And I feel like that's what makes it more conversational, you know? Because I have to talk to the audience to figure out how to get there, you know?
Yeah, the basic skeleton is there. Now you're just filling in the rest of the body. That makes complete sense. But I think I would psych myself out if I even tried that. But you know what? Maybe I should make that a personal challenge for me. I should listen to every comic story and then be like, all right, try that.
Get down.
Just try somebody else's approach, you know?
Yeah. And
I don't know. That's me just talking through my own shit.
Well, no. It might be comfortable for you. You never know. But I didn't even, again, this was something that I realized about myself in the pandemic. I didn't realize that that's what I was doing until I didn't have it anymore. You know what I mean? When I'm sitting there staring at a blank notebook or a blank computer screen, I'm like, why the hell can't I write a joke? And I'm like, oh, because this isn't how you write jokes, dude. You know?
Yeah, well, and that's why everybody has their own approach. As soon as the stay-at-home orders began and shit, I flew through like 5 or 6 notebooks. I was writing like I've never written before to, one, stay occupied, and 2, to, work on all this material for when stand-up comes back around again. Yeah. And then it was like more and more closures, and then I got like super bummed out, and then I didn't write for like 2 or 3 months, even though I just went through a tear like I've never done before.
Right.
It was like, oh my God, I'm going to come out of this stuff with so many ideas and so much more material. And then it's like, okay, everything's closed. Well, fuck. And then I got super depressed for a while.
Well, that's totally normal.
I just started to, because we didn't know what the fuck was happening. Nobody knew, but we just knew that it sucked.
Right. I also feel like no matter how much, at least for me, no matter how much I write down on paper, it doesn't matter, because I had a comic early on, a local guy who doesn't even do it anymore. This was kind of, you know what? Now that I'm actually speaking through this, I forgot about this until right now. This was the difference from me writing out every single word until me kind of more loosely doing conversational. We were doing, Stuart Huff was recording an album in Cleveland at the Natural History Museum. So this had to have been maybe 2015, 14 maybe. And he asked me to open, and I was like, oh my God, like I was one of the people doing like 10 minutes. And packed audience, and Stuart Huff is amazing. If anybody listening hasn't checked him out, you definitely need to.
I know that name. I don't think I know him, but I absolutely know that name.
So he's wonderful.
No.
He is just the sweetest guy, super, super funny, and kind of heady is the thing. He's got a Southern accent, but he's very intelligent, and he plays on that, or at least he used to, where he's like, I'm not dumb, I just sound like this, that kind of a thing. But his jokes are so well crafted, and they're more I don't even know how to, like, observations on the world instead of just jokes. He's saying more than just doing comedy, if that makes sense. There's more to his material. So I was doing that. I was doing that set, and I had all my jokes written out word for word. I had my notebook. I'm studying my notebook before I go on stage, and it didn't go as well as I had hoped for the room that we were in. Like, they knew we were recording.
Yeah.
It was basically like a small theater. Like, everyone else crushed. I felt like mine only went okay. And when I got off stage, I was talking to one of the other comics, and I was like, I don't know what's going on, man. Like, I had it written out. This is exactly what I wanted, and he was like, "Oh my God, sorry, I told you I have a cold."
No, it's okay. Don't even worry about it.
So I, like, had it written out, and I told him, I was like, it's not going how it didn't go how I wanted it to. And he was like, well, that makes sense because your writing voice and your speaking voice aren't the same voice. And, like, when he said that, it's like a light bulb went off in my head where I was like, oh my God, that's 100% accurate. Like, I don't write in the same tone that I speak. And it was funny because once I, like, made that distinction, I was able to see it so much more clearly. Like, when I write things, and I've written freelance written for, like, magazines and things like that. And even when I read the jokes and things that I've written as a piece, it would never translate to on stage because I'm like, I don't talk that way. You know what I mean? Like, I use different words, or I structure
Absolutely.
yeah, you structure your sentences differently when it's written down than when you're speaking it. And that right there was the turning point for me, when it was like, oh, this obviously isn't working, you know?
Dude, sometimes the littlest piece of advice is the one that sticks with you the most. I remember I was brand new. I started doing comedy in college as well at Temple University. And I had, like, a couple jokes about, college life, all that shit. And a veteran comic in Philly told me, how come you're not putting all those Temple jokes in the same chunk? He goes, keep that stuff together. And I was like, holy shit. Like, that's what you do. You have your college chunk, your dating chunk, your chunk about your parents. But I had all these college jokes spread out in my entire set. And he told me, put them all together. I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Well, that's when you're new, you don't really, because you're doing such short sets all the time. You're doing 5 minutes at a time or whatever. So when it's time to string together a longer set, it's like, that's when you learn. I know it sounds so stupid because this is the shit that they teach in classes. So I know people look down on stand-up classes all the time, but they teach you, this is a bit, this is a chunk, this is a set. You know what I mean? So it's like, you don't know that, though. Like, if you're just doing stand-up a couple minutes at a time at open mics, nobody tells you what a chunk is until somebody does, or until you figure it out, where you're like, oh, that flows better. And it sounds so dumb to say it out loud, where it's like, oh, all the things about the same topic should go in order. That's weird, like.
Yeah, who would have thought?
Right.
And who would know there would be a segue to get to the next chunk without just saying, hey, speaking of.
Right. Oh, what else?
I know. So while we're talking about dogs, you're like, we weren't talking about dogs,
Nope,
actually.
dogs.
You were, and now it's weird.
Yeah.
I love when you can watch a comic and the segues are just so smooth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't even notice the transition from one topic. It could be anything under the sun to another topic, totally random. And I love when the comic takes you there and you don't even realize the transition.
Well, I've always been a fan of storytellers. Like, that's just my style of comedy. That's what I like. That's what I've mimicked. That's what I've, before I did stand up, I was the funny guy who could tell a story. You know what I mean? So I'm the same way in that sense, where, like, I like one-liners and I appreciate, I can't write like that. Like, I'm not a one-liner comic. I've been asked to do roast shows before and I rack my brain and it ends up being fine at the end. But that just setup punch is, I don't know. It's just not how my brain works. So when I watch people who really, really can, thread you along through an amazing story, that's top level for me,
Oh, absolutely. I love storytelling. I spent a couple years, Segura was really good to me for a long time. Still is, just haven't seen him in a while. But I watched him build so many stories over, like, months to a year to 2 years. And it was fucking fascinating to just have him start off. Like, I saw him do the Mike Tyson bit when it was only like 4 or 5 minutes. And then I think it's like 10 or 11 on the special.
Yeah.
And I watched him build that. And, like, sometimes, we'd be together back-to-back weeks. And I'd watch him work on it. Then I wouldn't see him for 3 more months. And holy shit, the story's so much funnier and 3 minutes longer. See him again 2 months later. It's now 10 minutes. Like, I love fucking watching a story build.
Well, and I feel like nothing feels better than that. Do you tell stories on stage?
I'm starting to get more into it now. It took
Yeah.
me, honestly, probably 14, 15 years. I've I'm delving into it more. It took me
Yeah.
a long time to realize I could tell a story, I think.
Right. Well, that's always been, like I said, my base. And so when you're on stage, and so okay, let me go back just a little bit. Like how I said, I don't love one-liners, or I don't. They're not my type. If I do have a funny one and say it'll work on stage, but it doesn't really fit anywhere in my set, I love it when you kind of
Hmm.
just put that on the back burner and you don't forget about it. But then 6 months later, you'll be in the middle of this story, and then that joke will come back and fit so smoothly in, and you're like, "Oh my god, that's where that was supposed to go this whole time," And that's another reason,
Yep.
honestly, why it took me so long to put out an album is because I'm always when you're doing stories, it develops so much over time that you're like, this story's never done. You know what I mean? And so you get nervous where it's like, up until my recording, there was one bit that I was telling for about 2.5 years. I started telling it's based in reality. It's a true story that happened to me in 2018, and then I just recorded it in 2020. And over that time, I was closing on this bit pretty much not every set, but pretty often. And every time I would do it, something small would change, or I add something here or there, or I would put in a callback. And then it got to the point where I was like, man, this has changed so much in the last, year. I don't want to put it out there and then have it change again. And then, but it's at some point, you're like, at some point, you got to be like, okay, let's move on from this. I can't work on the same bit for 15 years, which I know Seinfeld says he's done that and yada, yada. But it's when you have those little tags or those little moments where it comes together on stage organically, man, there's no better feeling.
Yo, yep. And to tag on to what you said, I said this on the podcast before. Gary Gulman said it best. He said, "Unless the crowd is saying the joke along with you, the joke's not done."
All right then.
So, yeah, exactly. So the crowd can know a bit and still love it, but if you're at the point where they're saying it along with you, all right, maybe it's time to shelve it. But jokes always evolve, and sometimes it's fun to bring back old stuff with new eyes. Like I always
Yes.
have fun. Actually, right before COVID a little bit, I brought back stuff from my first album just to have some fun with it and then take it other places. It was a lot of fun. The jokes are already on an album. I'm just dicking around because I'm bored with the set I'm working on. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It was a fun little distraction.
Honestly, doing this album was like that because this is material. So the material is basically from like my childhood, and then I called off a wedding in 2016, and then like dating. So those are the basic like three chunks: self-love, calling off a wedding, and my childhood, right? So the childhood jokes were some
Mm-hmm.
of the first that I've ever written. Like some of the jokes on that album were the first jokes where I was like, oh, okay, this works no matter where I tell it, like the stuff about my family. And then 2016, so 5 years ago, is when I went through that breakup. And so to have to go back and listen to sets from 5 years ago, I was so bad. Like the fact that anybody,
It's
like the fact that anybody was offering me money to do stand up is hilarious to me. But like and listening to it and kind of being able to structure it or piece it together in a different way, not being, it sounds so stupid, but not being so hurt and not being so emotionally attached to that material, and being able to look at it from like an outsider healed perspective, I think changed the game for it, being able to look at it
Mhm.
analytically as opposed to emotionally.
Yeah, no, but it's in general, it's hard to go back and listen to old stuff, especially when you're so much better. Like you're like, oh my god,
Yeah, right.
you're like you just said, I can't believe people were paying you to do money or paying you money to do comedy. I've had the exact same thoughts where like I listen to old sets or watch like even like an old audition showcase, and I fucking cringe in pain.
Oh
And it's
yeah.
like, man, this was my best stuff at the time. Like
Right.
I don't even know. I don't even know. But I mean, but that's the best comic you are at the time. So,
Right.
you're not doing anything wrong, but once you get better, like I don't even know the last time I listened to my first album. I couldn't even, it's easily been more than 5 years. And I don't know if I don't even know how I would react if I did.
Right. Well,
But that was the best comic I was in 2013.
when I was recording, I was like, man, this is amazing. I knew this material was good. So I'm also a very personal writer. I've never been great with the topical stuff. Like, I mean, yeah, you could like throw tweets out there. It's honestly why I say I'm not good at Twitter. It's because I'm like, it's difficult for me to take a topic that everybody's already talking about, and like, yeah, everybody has their own opinion, yada yada yada. But like, I've always been a fan of like, no one can tell your story. You know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely, it happened to you.
Yeah, you're never going to run into parallel thinking when you're telling the story of your life. Like, that will never happen. So I've always kind of leaned towards more personal, more emotional material. And so, like, developing even as a person from those couple years ago, like, that's like I in the 5 years since I started telling those jokes that are now on my album, I've quit drinking. You know what I mean? I live on my own. I've gotten a successful job. Like, so it's like, I'm not even the same human being I was when I wrote this. So that's what I think is kind of interesting when I go back and listen to old sets, is like, yes, I am very cringy. And it's like, come on, Mayor, like, you know how jokes work, you know?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like when I was listening to those sets, I was like, oh my God, you could hear it. I was like, I was so angry when I was telling these jokes. And I was like, yeah, that was an angry part of my life. And then a year later, it was like, man, I was so hurt. Like, and you could hear that coming through because that's the type of material, you know?
Yeah, and an album is just a snapshot of what you are at that time, or like any recording is. So, you know, I love if you were that you're angry, keep be angry. You know, I love the honesty of it. It was Laurie Kilmartin who said an album is just a snapshot of that time. So you can have 10 different comedy albums and 10 different vibes. Yeah, you know?
You're 10 different people. I'm not the same person I was not even close to 2006.
Yeah.
You know, and the material I'm working on now is like, man, I had my first weekend back on stage at Hilarity since my dad died, and it was rough. Because it's like I said, I'm a very personal comic, so I'm not going to get up there and act like this isn't what I'm going through. Like, I can't get up there and be like, more snow, guys, when I spent all day crying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's just not who I am. And so it was it is very hard to get people to laugh about death, at least so early on in my own grieving process. But I was thinking about that, like you said, with the second album. I'm like, oh man, this second album is going to be about getting clean, like stopping drinking, my dad dying. I'm like, this is going to be some heavy shit. It's going to take me a couple years to make such heavy topics, addiction, you know, COVID, death, like all that grieving. Like, it's going to take a while for this stuff to get funny. And I had to keep reminding myself that over the last weekend when I was on stage at Hilarities, where I was like, all right, it's still fresh. You haven't figured it out yet. You're bumming a lot of people out, but we're going to get there, you know?
Yeah, okay. I saw your post about one woman loved your jokes about your father and one woman did not.
Right.
So you were focusing on the one woman that did enjoy the jokes because you shared that experience, and whether the material is happy, sad, depressing, or horrible, you're still making a connection with somebody through comedy.
Right. Well, and that's the thing is like you start doing it. It was funny because I was telling my brothers and sisters, I work on the radio, and I was like, when we were talking about going back to work after my dad died, and they all, my one sister's a server, my other brother works in an office, and I was like, you guys don't have the same kind of job I do. I was like, I'm on the radio and I'm a stand-up, but going back to work for me, I can't just go through the motions. Like, I'm talking all day long. You know what I mean? Like, it's much more difficult to process these things in that line of work. And it was funny because I was telling them, I was like, never in a million years did I think 9 years ago, when I was getting into comedy and I just loved performing and I loved the adrenaline rush, and I was a cheerleader and in theater, and this was just kind of like an extension of that to me. Never did I think I would have a woman coming up to me crying saying, thank you for doing your dead dad jokes. My dad's dead too. You know what I mean? Like, this is not where I pictured I would be.
Talk about getting right to the point, though. She has good setups. She got right to it.
No, first of all, she asked me if that was real. She was like, did your dad really die? And I was like, that would be so
What the fuck would you make that up?
Like, if my dad wasn't
Jesus.
dead, and then I did 7 minutes of my dad died material, like, that's like, I'm all for
that.
I understand. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that kind of stuff has always baffled me.
Right.
Like if I do a story that's so uniquely true, like I bartend and wait tables, and I have a million jokes about it, and I would tell these stories about specific tables, and then people would be like, "Did that really happen?" And be like, "Yes." Why the fuck would I make that up?
Right.
How does real life? Not? I don't sit there and create funny ideas. I walk out my door, shit happens, and then I talk about it.
Right.
I'm not sitting here writing fairy tales.
Right. So that was kind of like how she started. She first asked me, "Is your dad really dead?" And I was like, "Yes." And she like got teary-eyed and she was like, "My dad died last year also from COVID." And she's like, "I haven't really been able to laugh about it. Like that wasn't in." She's like, "I didn't even think of that as an option for coping. Like it's not a funny thing." And so like telling jokes about it, she was like, that really helped me. And then you have those people where it's like, oh damn, like, so out of 5 shows where maybe I saw 800 people over the course of the weekend, this lady coming up to me, it made it worth it. Because earlier that night,
Oh my God, absolutely.
earlier that night I had a waiter come up to me and be like, "Man, I was asking these ladies if they wanted another round of drinks, and one woman was like, oh, yeah, I need something to make her funny." And I'm just like, what? One, why'd you tell me that? 2, like, that's a person who wasn't going to remember me anyway. You know what I mean? Like, the lady who cried will never forget that feeling. And she'll now be like, okay, it's okay to laugh at some things. Whereas that other woman was just drunk having a night with her friends, and she didn't give a shit anyway.
Exactly. Fuck them. Yep. You made a connection with somebody that's going to last. They're going to remember you. They're going to buy your album. They're going to come back and see you. That's pretty much guaranteed. And also, fuck that other woman because you hope she doesn't come back to see you. You don't need a drink to enjoy a comic. You need a brain, an open mind, and just to not be a bitch.
Right. Well, and honestly, it was like with this material, it's kind of changing my mind too. Like I'm knowing that this isn't going to be for everybody. And honestly, I'm glad. Like I've been in so much pain over the last month that I'm like, I am so happy for you that you can't relate to this. I don't think that people understand that. Where I'm like, good. I'm glad you can't relate to a panic attack that ends in you calling a mental health crisis hotline. Like that's amazing for you, But the people who can, maybe I can make it a little bit more normal, like, hey, you're not alone kind of a thing.
And it's more, I mean, I love all sorts of comedy, but I love stuff that's personable and relatable. And also, like, there's just such a, like, nobody wants to go to a comedy show and hear about how awesome our lives are, how much we love our family. Like, you want to go and hear what's fucked up. You want to hear what's relatable, what's real, what pain is, because I think most comedy comes out of that.
Yeah.
Like, most of my material, comes from not so much pain, but like annoyance and irritation at other people. And that's the same way for a lot of comics, but that's what it's supposed to be. Not like what did she expect to hear? That one woman, like jokes about Bed Bath & Beyond? Like,
yeah, no, that's exactly
have
what
you never seen a comic before?
No, that's what they want. They want like kind of, they just want to come and be entertained and they don't want to think. They just want to laugh. And I have never, and I need to say this, I have never been the person who's like, my comedy is important. You need to hear me. Like I've never been that person who's like, I'm actually up here saying something. I hate those people because 90% of the time, those
I'm not that
people are
comic
not
either.
funny. Like 90% of the time, they're not saying shit. They're not funny. And they honestly don't, sorry, that's my birth control alarm going off in the background. But I've never been that person. So for me to be like, oh, you just don't want to think or you just don't want to feel, I'm not that guy. But when it comes to material that is so personal and so emotional for me, I understand. I'm like, you didn't want to have to feel sad tonight. I get that. And if I didn't release that tension, creating the tension is half the joke. Releasing it is the good half. If I didn't release it for you, then I haven't done my job, So like I understand where you're coming from.
I do too, but I just I had drunk people in the crowd last week when I had shows in North Jersey, and like some of the crowds were drunk and rowdy, and it's like, man, people still suck. Despite a global pandemic, people still have to throw their opinions out there. They have to yell at the comics. It's like, man, can't you guys just fucking chill?
Right.
Have you read Laurie Kilmartin's Dead People Suck?
No, but I need to. Everybody has been like pointing me in her direction, and I gotta get on that.
It's a hilarious book, but she also has an album about it too. So, I think it's definitely worth a read or listen. I absolutely love her, and the book and the album are both absolutely hysterical, and she talks her way dealing through her pain of her loss, and it's fucking hilarious.
Great.
So that's my if I may suggest one thing, my book review, Laurie Kilmartin, Dead People Suck.
I'm gonna have to, yeah.
So in your earlier days, I'm going to go back a little bit and tie a couple things up here together. What day jobs did you have when you were your first couple years?
Oh, I bartended forever. I bartended in college, and then and then through up until 2019. So I've only been out of this industry for 2 years now.
Okay, me too. I've been bartending and waiting tables for a long, long time.
Yeah.
What kind of place did you work at?
So I worked at college bars, obviously in college, and then I worked at sports bars, and then I worked at the Foundation Room in House of Blues, which is like a little higher end, little swankier. But being behind the bar is different than being at a table, whereas I was still able to keep a little bit of sass and a little bit of, attitude and not have to be so ass kissy all the time. Because the people who
put on that fucking fake smile.
Right. When you're drinking, a $96 shot of whiskey, those people want to be treated a certain way. And I understand that. But for whatever reason, when it's just two guys sitting at a bar and still drinking the same whiskey, it's a very different vibe at the bar than it is at the table for dinner. So I was still able to joke around a little bit with them. But yeah, I've always been behind the bar.
Did you get a lot of material out of that?
I never was able to translate my restaurant stuff. I have done a couple.
Oh, really? That's so funny.
Well, I've done a couple service industry events where it felt good to get like 25 minutes out to people who actually enjoyed it and understood it. But I had a very difficult time taking my service industry gripes and making them relatable to everybody because people don't want to hear about how they're assholes. And that was all I had was like, hey, do you go to restaurants? You're a dickhead. And I had a very hard time getting that material across.
Oh, that's so funny. This is why I love about every comic's angle and approach and everybody's take on everything, because I've been at my bartending job for a long time, and it's like not half my act, that's an exaggeration, but a good chunk of my act is about bartending and waiting tables, and I'm getting new jokes all the time. Every single day I write something down at work, and after I'm not going to exaggerate and say every show, but most of the post-show compliments are from bartenders and servers who are like, you nailed it. Oh my God, I've been there. So like, to me, no matter what I talk about on stage, what people want to talk to me the most about is the bartending stuff. And it's male, female, old, young. A lot of us have been in the industry, and that's what connects with me the most.
I think it was also because when I was trying those jokes, I was a lot younger too. So I was like 23, I'm cute, and I'm up there. My early gigs were not, my 2 years and 3 years into comedy, those 2 years I was a house MC at a casino gig. So I'm talking to people in like their 60s and 70s, and that's when I was doing the most of that restaurant material. And anybody knows that people in their 60s and 70s are the worst people to wait on. So it was like I really, really could not get it. Maybe I should bring it back and try it again. But I did not do well with that type of material.
Oh man, that's been my bread and butter. The bartending stuff, and also like I feel like every time I fly or drive a long way to a gig, something horrible happens. So like the bartending stuff and a travel joke will always find a way into my set somehow, because every time I do one of those two, something fucking happens. Right. And it's not me, it's other people. Just to clarify, it's not me, it's always other people.
Right. Something always happens to you for sure. I get that. It's so funny too, because I think working around you're from Philly, right?
Yep.
So working around the Midwest.
Been here the whole time.
I think it's different because no one from the Midwest really flies anywhere. Like if you're on a coast, so you are probably grew up flying places and things like that. I don't know, I'm just assuming. But like anywhere anybody ever had to go on vacation, anything like that, in the Midwest, you drove. So when I first started getting on flights and I would try to do jokes about flying in the middle of a small town in Indiana, people were looking at me like, bitch, I've never been on a plane. I'm 50. What are you talking about? So it was I have a bad tendency to give up on jokes too. Like if it didn't, like earlier in my days where if it didn't work within the first 3 times I tried it on stage, I wouldn't try it again. That was a bad habit I had earlier.
Oh, that's such a small number.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I didn't give shit months.
That's
No, when I first started, it was like, if this doesn't work immediately, I'm not doing it anymore.
Are you more forgiving with yourself now?
A little bit in the sense of what I mentioned earlier, whereas if I do a joke and it works, but I don't really know where to put it, I'll bring it back later or I'll keep it in the back of my mind. But I'm always kind of, or at least trying to trim the fat and trying to get to the point. You know what I mean?
Now, are you good at getting to the point even though you write on stage? Or have you gotten better at tightening it up on stage? You know what I mean? Like sometimes when you watch a comic who's more conversational, they can be funny, very funny, but still also like get to the point.
Right.
You're rambling. So,
Well,
have you gotten better at talking through your jokes and getting to the point quicker?
Yes. So that's also something that develops.
Makes sense.
Yeah. That's something that develops over the course of the
Okay,
weekend, kind of like what you were saying, where it's like, if I take a premise on stage Thursday, so how you were saying how Tom Segura's bits and stories get longer, I feel like mine get shorter. Whereas like I'll take this idea, I'll take this idea on stage where, like I said, I have kind of the idea of it, I have the punchline, and the first time I do it, it'll be 4 minutes. And I'll have all these tags in there that I don't necessarily like or whatever. And then by the end of the weekend, that 4 minutes will become a really tight minute and a half. Does that make sense?
Wow,
kind of
that
like
is
talking it
yeah.
out.
No, that
Yeah, kind of by like talking it out and being like, okay, this is technically, yes, this is still a tag, but this tag doesn't work as well as the other two, so I'm gonna take it out.
no, that makes complete sense to me. That's funny though. Okay, so you start with a higher, with a longer bit, and then whittle it down. I like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you're just editing it to, even though it could be that long and those tags are okay, I'd rather it be shorter. And then once it's down to that minute and a half, and it's like, okay, now let's take the second part of it and kind of whittle that down, and then you put those two together, and now it's back to that 4 minutes, but it's a much better 4 minutes, if that makes sense.
No, that makes complete sense. I love your approach to things. I haven't had this conversation with anybody on the podcast yet. I'm like kind of fascinated, but it's awesome. So
it's backwards.
Earlier, yeah. Hey. Well, yeah, too. I mean, I guess I've worked through some things backwards where you're like something embarrassing happens or you're angry and you think it's funny. So you have to start with that and then backtrack. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, earlier in the podcast, you mentioned you've had several bombs. I mean, we all had. You said you bombed and bombed and bombed after a couple months into comedy.
Yeah.
Do you have any one that really sticks out to you?
Well, there was
one or two, you know, and anything that still makes you cringe now is the stories I love hearing because we all have them.
Yeah, for sure. One of the earliest ones that was probably the most, I wouldn't even want to say traumatic, but I wanted to quit after was, I did a Sunday night, I think it was an open mic. It was either an open mic or a showcase, right after I moved back to Cleveland, and it was at a punk rock dive bar in Cleveland, and Sunday nights were $2 whiskey night. And so I am 22, 23 years old. Most of my jokes are about cheerleading and dieting and things that punk rockers who are drinking $2 whiskey on a Sunday night do not want to hear about. And I think that was my first really horrible, gut-wrenching bomb, was being on stage there and just realizing nobody was listening to me, like watching people watch me and then turn their head to have a conversation, like that feeling of losing people and not being able to get them back, and just being, honestly, it sounds so stupid, but feeling so alone, like on stage, like, wow, nobody cares, like at all. I remember that night after that show, I went home and I seriously thought about quitting comedy because I was like, man, I can't. This was after a couple bombs before that too, at just other showcases around town. And I was like, I cannot relate to people. Like, what is going on? That was probably my first real big bad bomb where I just felt like hopeless. You know what I mean? And then since then,
you do. One time I bombed. Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to say, since then, all my worst bombs tend to come from opening for YouTubers. Those are like my
Christ
real,
almighty.
real bad ones.
I've been in.
You got to go up and do 20 minutes in front of someone who's on TikTok, and the crowd has never been to a comedy show. They truly don't give a shit about you. They want to watch this guy's videos, which they will. You know what I mean? So you're going up and doing. And here's the other thing is that those are normally younger audiences. And I'm like, they can't relate to being sober. They can't relate to any calling off a wedding. They don't know what any of this. These are 22-year-old kids who are getting drunk and want to see the guy from the internet. And you're just eat your dick. For at one point, I addressed one of the worst bombs I've had in the last 2 years. I addressed the fact that I wasn't the guy. That's how bad it was going. I was like 8 minutes in with, I'm not exaggerating, no laughs. And I straight up told them, I was like, listen, guys, I understand I'm not him. Okay. I got 12 more minutes up here. We can either get through it together or we can't. And then even that, nobody acknowledged it. It was like I didn't say anything. They were still silent, not a cough, nothing to break the silence. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is the worst. I got off, I bailed 4 minutes early. I got off at 16 instead of 20. And I was just like, I can't do this. Like, I cannot. 20 minutes of silence is so long.
Oh my God. Okay. You just reminded me of something I haven't thought about in years. I opened for the Impractical Jokers at Helium in Philly on a Monday. We had 2 shows on a Monday. Both shows were sold out. I'm hosting. I'm only doing like 10 to 12. It's a very quick set. It's just me and then them. The crowd, I'm not getting heckled, but people are yelling shit left and right? Oh, yeah. And I'm like, guys, it's a comedy club. It's not a free-for-all. I talk, you don't. You just shut up and listen. They'll be out in a few minutes. I'm doing a quick set. It's my job to get you guys warmed up. This show is not interactive. I'm done my set. They're fucking interactive the whole time. I'm like, man, I'm the asshole here.
Yeah. Also, yeah, not knowing what you're going up before. Because, like, a lot of the times I'm not familiar with who these TikTok guys are. And then I go up and I'm talking about whatever. And then I'm like, oh, their whole thing is about White Claw and cocaine. All right. Yeah, that's why they didn't like the sober jokes.
Dude, I hate the fact that, like, the YouTube stars have made their way into the comedy clubs. Like, why can't you take that shit to, like, anywhere that's not a fucking comedy club?
Right. Well, and here's the thing, and this is what I tell people. I'm not mad at the YouTube guy. The fact that you cultivated an audience who
wants to see
you live and is going to pay $75 to do it, amazing. I am 100% jealous. I will admit that. I am absolutely jealous. But
of course.
I haven't found that yet. I don't know how to do that yet. So I'm jealous of that fact. I'm not mad at their hustle. I'm not mad at any of that. It's like you said, this isn't a comedy show. It's not stand-up, you know?
And I guess, like, whose fault is it? It's got to be the owners and the bookers too, because it's their room that they're, letting them come into. So it's the whole, business-wide thing.
Right.
Yeah. So I haven't done one of those shows in a while, I guess because of COVID, but it's just, I remember opening for a couple people and then just being like, man, this isn't even fun. They don't get me. And I'll tell one thing. So Dan and I had the weirdest show in Albany 2 years ago. It was a Sunday show, just one show in Albany, and about 150 people in the crowd. It's not small. And I bombed so bad. I bombed so bad, and typically Dan's crowds are great. So this one stuck out like a sore thumb. I'm like, holy shit, like what the fuck was that? And I felt bad. I couldn't get the room. I'm doing comedy 15 years. How do I not get the show off the ground at all? But I didn't. And then I'm watching Dan, and he's doing a little better than me, but they're still really quiet. And I'm like, holy shit, this show is fucking bizarre. This is one of the weirdest nights I've ever had, opening for a specific headliner that the crowd came to see.
Right.
We sold so much merch after that show, and every single person said to Dan, we love the podcast. We love the podcast. We love the podcast. They didn't even know how to fucking react to a comedy show. Yeah, it was so bizarre.
Like, they probably had never been to one, and they were just trying to figure it out, and they're just podcast people,
Yeah, I've been opening for Dan, I guess, 4 or 5 years now, and we still joke about Albany, because it was all the shows we've done. That one particular show completely stands by itself as the fucking weirdest show.
Right. And those are the ones that drive me nuts, where people will, like, you'll bomb or you'll feel like you're bombing, and then people will come up to you afterward and tell you how great you did, and you're like, oh, you could have laughed. Like, this is nice to hear, but laughing would have been better.
Yeah, you could have vocalized it. Thank you. I mean, I appreciate your smile, but open your fucking mouth.
Right.
Let the laugh out. So, all right, Hillbilly Bougie, it's out. It's awesome. Thank you for being here. What do you have coming up? How's your calendar looking for the rest of 2021?
Oh man, I'm not getting back on the road until end of April, early May. Just to be completely safe. So I'm just pushing that album, man. Check that out. I'm on Instagram at Mary Santora Comedy, Twitter Mary_Santora, and then debut album Hillbilly Bougie is available everywhere. Anywhere you get music or comedy, it's out there.
Cool. I'll definitely promote as well when I put the podcast out, so we're all set there. Cool. Mary, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. This is the conversation I love to have, just shooting the shit about, the shit we go through. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.